Hey everyone, today I want to talk about the non-aggression principle. This channel is mainly focused on talking about subjects as it relates to morality and society and how society is and how society should be. So I should talk about my moral philosophy and where I get that from. I get it mostly from the non-aggression principle. So the non-aggression principle is the idea that one individual cannot initiate force against another individual or their property. And the only time that the initiation of force is permissible is in self-defense. Another important component of the non-aggression principle is the idea of consent. You know, the difference between theft and charity is consent, and the difference between sex and rape is consent. Consent is a very important part of the NAP. Now, we all know that we all live by this rule already. This is not profound. We learn this type of stuff in elementary school and in our families and in how we interact with people. So we already operate this way, except there is a pretty big part of our society that does not comply with the NAP. And that, by and large, is the government. Because the government does a lot of things that you and I individually cannot do. And some people might say, well, that's because the government is an organization that is supposed to act on our behalf. It's an organization that's supposed to be able to do things that we ourselves cannot do. While that might be the idea behind government, the reality is government is just a group of people. And so having a different set of morality and a different set of permissible acts between citizens and the government is inconsistent and, I would argue, very troubling. So I'll give you a few examples of the type of things that I'm talking about. I won't go too far into depth because all of these subjects are very deep and very time-consuming and a lot of things to talk about. But here's a short list and a little explanation. So taxation. Taxation is technically theft because the tax agents and the government and the IRS do not seek our consent when taxing us. There is no mechanism for not paying taxes if you feel morally inclined to not pay them. For instance, if I don't want to pay taxes to support the war on drugs, and I don't pay them, if I figure out what amount of my taxes would be used on it and I don't pay it, eventually the government would come and take it. And that would be against my consent, and technically it would be theft. People who would argue against the idea of taxation as theft would be to say that we all vote for our government and the government does what we want to do. Therefore, that is consent in and of itself for taxation. But that is to ignore the fact that our government oftentimes, maybe even most of the time, does things that we do not want or consent to. And even that argument as a whole is fallacious, because just because the people around me vote to do something and they have the consent of the people around me does not mean they have my consent. And that does not break the NAP or the idea behind it. That does not automatically give my consent to taxation like that. The next one would be victimless crimes. So according to the non-aggression principle, victimless crimes are not crimes, and they should not be policed by the government because no one is being aggressed against. Everybody involved is consenting. Therefore, there is no need for a third party to come in and make restitution for injured parties because there is no injured party. But instead, when you have laws against victimless crimes, what ends up happening is the government ends up kidnapping people or putting them in jail for these actions and fining them which is extortion. Obviously, in our everyday lives, we can't do this. We can't kidnap somebody who does something that we don't like or that we perceive as damaging to themselves. Moreover, we can't extort them or blackmail them. Or I guess the proper word is extortion. We can't extort them into stopping or controlling their behavior. So the government doing it is immoral for those reasons. And now there are some criticisms of the NAP, and a lot of them center around taking the non-aggression principle very strictly. And now one of the criticisms of the NAP is that if it is taken too strictly, it becomes absurd, or it steals the compassion out of human interaction. And this is illustrated by the example of, let's say there's a man starving in the woods because he's lost and he's been there for a couple days. And then he comes across a cabin. Now, a very strict reading of the non-aggression principle would say that it would be wrong for him to break into that cabin to find shelter and to find food and water to avoid starving to death. That's true. If you were to take the NAP very strictly, that is a conclusion you could come to. But I believe that the NAP is designed to save human life or improve human life, and therefore using it in a way that would allow somebody to die is to miss the point. So in that sense, I would say, in that scenario, I would say that it is permissible for the man to break into the cabin to find shelter and food so that he doesn't die. And the caveat to that is that when he is able to, when he comes into contact with the owner, and when he's able financially, he should pay back the owner of the cabin for any damages. Let's say if he broke the door down or broke a window, and for any food or supplies that he used. And so that, I think that satisfies the non-aggression principle as far as protecting an individual's property. Because while the man had to, in order to save himself, he had to aggress on someone else, but in the end, he can make restitution and return the cabin's owner, all his property to its original state. And for me, that is permissible, and also because there's no malice behind the actions of the man that's starving in the woods. He's not there to steal or to break the cabin and take the food. He's there to survive. And so I find that to be permissible, and I find that criticism, or that example of a criticism, doesn't quite hold up to the spirit of the NAP as I interpret it. It's kind of I would call it the "don't be a dick" amendment to the NAP. In the end, we want to organize society and find rules that improve people's lives. So having a strict interpretation of the NAP like that, permitting or barring somebody from breaking into a cabin or saving his life, is a little too brutal for my taste, and not completely useful. So that's the non-aggression principle in a nutshell. It's simple in concept, but in application, it can be a little more complicated when it comes to trying to figure out what is the appropriate level of government, or should there be a government, and how we would solve complex social issues. But it's still simple enough to where we can find various different solutions to any problem we might face, as long as we don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. As long as no one's initiating force and everyone is consenting, well, then the solution is permissible, and those are very easy metrics for which to measure how we get things done. Because I think solving problems with cooperation is always superior than to trying to solve problems with coercion. And most of the time, that is how the government works. I would even argue that that's how the government works all of the time. That's all I have for now. Thank you for listening. There is much more to talk about when it comes to the NAP and morality, and that will be coming in the future.